Good day, students. This is Mr. Mark Joseph B. Badillo, and welcome to the subject, Disaster Readiness and Risk Reduction. Welcome, STEM students, and we are going to begin this new school year by discussing another new subject in your grade level, which is about disaster readiness and risk reduction. For this day, we are going to make an overview for this subject matter, but before that, let me present to you our essential learning competencies that will serve as our objective for this discussion. So first is discuss the overview of the subject. Second is define the meaning and purpose of the subject. And last one, we are going to explain the learning system during our discussions. Before we proceed in our entire discussion, let me ask you a question. Are you ready? This question is very essential for us because this question is asking for you that you are ready or are you ready? Being ready or being prepared is very essential for us to survive in the disasters that comes in our way and also that comes in real life situation. What is disaster readiness and risk reduction subject? This subject focuses on the application of scientific knowledge and the solution of practical problems in a physical environment. And also this subject is designed to bridge the gap between theoretical science and daily living. As you can see in the illustration that is presented in this slide, this picture shows the different disasters that we experience in real-life situations such as tornadoes, typhoons, hurricanes, earthquakes, landslides, fire hazards, and even accidents. Those are the disasters that maybe we are experiencing in real life situation and also in the prone areas. This subject composed of two units such as Unit 1, Disaster Demystified, and Unit 2, the Anatomy of Disaster. That is the overview of this subject. Let's proceed to Unit 1, Disaster Demystified. This unit talks about the concept of disaster and also the paradigm shift from disaster response to disaster risk reduction. And also, disaster risk reduction is now being implemented throughout the Philippines. More and more, people have begun to understand the hazards that they are subjected to, meaning the government's efforts in shifting the mindset of Filipinos towards disaster risk reduction is aimed toward all sectors in hopes of reducing the effect of disasters, especially the most vulnerable ones, by implementing a more effective disaster management system in every level of government. This chapter entitled as Angry Planet. This chapter focuses on the concept of disaster and also disaster risk, the nature of disaster, and also the effects of disaster. In this chapter, we are going to explain the disaster and also we are going to differentiate the risk factors underlying disasters and also we are going to describe the effects of disasters on one's life. That's for chapter 1. In the next chapter that we have, and also entitled as Chapter 2, Beware of Hazards. This chapter focuses on the hazards and also the exposure on hazards and even in disasters. On the third one, about vulnerability. And last one, the emergency management cycle. This chapter focuses on the concept of hazards, the examples of hazards, and also the impact of various hazards, and the vulnerability and why certain sectors of society are more vulnerable than others. And lastly, we are going to differentiate among hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. On the next chapter that we have is all about chapter 3, entitled as We Will Survive. This chapter focuses on the concept of disaster risk reduction and management plan, and also the concept of disaster risk reduction, the emergency plan, and also monitoring and evaluation, and also the preparation for survival kits and materials. This chapter talks about the concepts and principles or even elements of DRR, and also we are going to recognize the importance of DRR on one's life. And also we are going to develop a community preparedness plan and prepared survival kits for self and family. That's for chapter 3. On the last chapter that we have on this unit is all about chapter 4, the people's response. This chapter talks about, yes, the Philippine DRRM law in implementing rules and regulations about the DRR. And also this chapter talks about the information and resources from the government and the Philippine laws on disaster risk reduction, and lastly, the incident command system. This chapter explains DRR-related laws and policies and avail of existing DRR-related services, programs, and projects. And also, understanding the concept of an incident command system is very essential also for this chapter. On the second unit that we have on this subject is all about Unit 2, the anatomy of disaster. This unit talks about the anatomy of disaster and the types of disasters. And also this unit talks about how disaster affects our life. Understanding the hazards would lead to more effective disaster risk reduction effort. Being a tropical country in the Pacific places in the Philippines in a position where it is exposed to a lot of hazards, meaning storm pass by the country almost 20 times a year. Being part of the Pacific Ring of Fire means that the Philippines have many volcanoes that could erupt at many times. Our mountainside, if not taken care of properly, it would produce landslides or even sinkholes. Those who are living near the coastal areas are in danger of storm surges or even tsunamis. Whereas, those who are inland and live mostly in the urban areas live precariously with the risk of earthquakes and fires. It is only by having knowledge of what we need to face that we will be able to plan properly and reduce the negative effects of hazards and to avoid also disaster. Let's proceed to the first chapter that we have on this unit, as all about chapter 5, on shaky grounds. This chapter talks about the earthquake and how earth moves. And also we are going to discuss earthquake and earthquake hazards under this chapter. And also we are going to differentiate intensity and magnitude and the hazard maps. And lastly, we are going to discuss how we can prepare during, before, and after an earthquake and the precautionary and safety measures in earthquakes. On the next chapter that we have on this unit is all about Restless Inner Earth. This chapter talks about the volcanoes, and we are going to discuss what are the volcanoes, and we are going to elaborate active and inactive volcanoes in the Philippines. And also, we are going to discuss signs of impending volcanic eruption and the volcanic hazards that we can get in volcanic eruptions. And lastly, what to do before, during, and after a volcanic eruption. On the next chapter that we have on this subject is all about, yes, it is obvious because as you can see the picture, it shows the landslides, and that is From Under Our Feet, entitled as From Under Our Feet, that will serve as our chapter 7. This chapter talks about the mass movement, and also rainfall and induced landslides, and also the types of landslides, and the ground subsidence and collapse, and lastly, preventing and mitigating mass movement. On the next chapter that we have is all about chapter 8, entitled as Water, Water Everywhere. This chapter talks about the typhoon corridor of the Pacific, and also the hydrometeorological hazards and the concept of the water cycle. Next is we have surviving hydrometeorological hazards and hydrometeorological hazards in modern world. And lastly, we have common diseases from hydrometeorological hazards. This chapter distinguishes the different hydrometeorological hazards and also recognizes signs of impending hydrometeorological hazards, and we are going also to discuss how we can apply the appropriate measures to be done before, during, and after a hydrometeorological hazards. On the last chapter that we have on this subject is all about chapter 9, Taming the Fire. This chapter talks about the fire hazards. And also this chapter talks about the concept of fire, the stages of fire, the 4 sides of a fire story, or even how fire forms. It also recognizes the elements of fire tetrahedron in different situations and analyzing the different causes of fires. And also, in this chapter, we are going to apply the basic response procedures during a fire incident. And also we are going to discuss exit drills and evacuation. That is the overview of this subject. How can I learn with tutorial videos? So, these are the things that you should do before, during, and after our pre-recorded lessons. This you should take down notes about important details in every lesson, and you must answer some quizzes or questions that relates with the subject and lessons for me to check if you understand the lesson. Focus yourself on listening to the lessons we have in each subject. For me to, before I end this discussion, let me leave you with this Bible verse. Proverbs 16 verse 16. It says that having wisdom and understanding is better than having silver or gold. Nice and expensive items can be enjoyable, but there are very few things in life that can never be taken away, will never go out of style, and that truly make you a better person. And education is one of those things. Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. I think that's for all. Thank you for listening. This is Mr. Mark Joseph Bibadillo. If you have questions and clarifications, don't hesitate to ask me questions directly, or even you can comment down below. Thank you for listening. God bless you and stay safe always.